Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beckman's Breakdowns, the show where I take a look at all of the Beat Earth World Tour events at Super 750 and Super 1000 level, including all the majors and the team events. And it's that last one, team events. That's the reason why we're here, because just this past Sunday, we saw the end of both the Thomas and Uber Cup finals. If you don't know what those events are, they're the world's men's, that's the Thomas Cup, and the world's women's team, that's the Uber Cup Championships. Lots and lots went down. It was one of the longest. I think it's the first time the Thomas and Uber Cup finals have been played over, I think it was 11 days of competition. So it was a very long tournament. Lots to talk about. I was there commentating for the entire event, so I got to see a lot of these things firsthand. I wonder whether that will have a better effect on these breakdowns, but we'll see. Like I said, plenty to talk about. I'm not sure I can talk about absolutely everything. I could be here for hours, but I've picked out some key things that stood out to me, and I've also picked out a number of questions, some amazing questions that you asked me on Instagram and on YouTube. Let's get straight into it. The first thing I want to talk about is I want to focus on Malaysia's Thomas Cup performance, more specifically their men's singles, because there's some negative stuff naturally, and there's also some positive stuff. Okay, so Malaysia lost in the quarterfinals of the Thomas Cup 3-0 to China, and I know that throughout this whole event, their Thomas Cup team has been taking a lot of flack, because not only did they fall in the quarterfinals rather tamely to China, but also some other specific performances, one of which I actually commentated on, and that was Malaysia versus England, where Malaysia won 3-2, only winning the deciding men's singles by Lee Jia. And at that stage of the tournament, the majority of the criticism came towards the men's singles players. And I think because that was Malaysia's first match in the competition, it kind of set the tone. In these team events, I spoke to a number of my fellow commentators and some other people. And I think even Kenny Onison, the coach of the men's singles squad for Malaysia, made it quite important how momentum. We saw that with France getting all the way to the final. But if you can get momentum within your team, getting early good wins, it can really kind of snowball throughout the event. And likewise, the reverse can happen, and we kind of saw that with the Malaysian men's singles against England. They didn't play their top player Lin Chun-yi. They went for Justin Ho, Idol Sholay, and Lee Jia, and the first two players there both lost matches to their English opponents, and you could kind of see the lack of confidence, or that kind of what that result did to those players. It was then compounded when Malaysia then played Finland. They dropped Idol at second singles and put Lin Chun-yi in, which I kind of expected. And Lin Chun-yi went and lost to Joachim Oldorf, a former European bronze medalist. A good player, but obviously someone that most people would have expected Lin Chun-yi to win. And you could just see the confidence in that team. That's what I'm talking about, that snowball effect. It can work both ways. And you could see it seriously knock them. I mean, against England, Justin Ho was incredibly nervous against Harry Wang. I felt he played very one pace and was mistiming so many shots. I don't think I've seen a player break as many strings as he did in one game. He hit there was some very big chances for him, and he mistimed it. Harry Wang, I did feel step up against Justin Ho, and I think he stepped up throughout this tournament in general, which is positive for English badminton, but Justin did look rather frozen to the ground. Idol Sholay was similar to Justin, but I'd say even worse. The face, if you watch his face when he finished after he'd lost to Cho Lin Kyan, the face he makes is a man that's just like, devastation on his face. You can kind of see, like, he don't know how he looked. I don't know, like a broken man, in all honesty. He is a skillful player, is Idol, but he simply couldn't do anything. He looked very heavy-legged and also frozen still. Like I said, against Finland, Lin Chun-yi lost to Joachim Oldorf. He seemed to lack, for me, Lin Chun-yi, and I would say this a little bit about Justin, because those two, Idol never played again. Justin and Lin Chun-yi did. But I just felt they lacked any punch or power, or just any ability to exert pressure. I know how good both Lin Chun-yi and Justin Ho can play. and I've been impressed with certain aspects of their game in the past. But just watching them in the hall compared to other players or top nations, I think it was a confidence thing. Like I said, I think the first couple of matches really set the tone and just didn't really get the ball rolling in the right direction. But they just weren't really able to hurt the top players consistently enough. And that's exactly what I saw when they played China. I mean, Lin Chun-yi did go to 3 with Hsiu-chi, but I feel that was only because Hsiu-chi in the second game kind of wanted to cruise over the line, and he kind of took his foot too much off the pedal, and he was also recovering from his illness from earlier in the week. And I feel like Justin Ho, it looked for me with him, he was just rallying around. He wasn't really trying to do anything. He's technically nice, moves well, wasn't injecting any pace into the rallies. He wasn't trying to play any dangerous shots that I know that he can do. He kind of played very much within himself, and maybe his earlier performances in the tournament knocked his confidence to be able to do that against a player of Li Shifang's level. But I just felt that both Lin Chun-yi and Justin Ho lacked the X factor, the kind of X factor that I know that they can bring. Their power wasn't there. There was not enough sharpness in their shots. And for me, it just felt like they were hitting shuttles over the net. I couldn't really, when I watched them, figure out what they were doing, what was their game plan. Now, what compounded Malaysia, there is obviously one men's singles player that's a positive, but I want to save that for the end. What compounded Malaysia in this event for me was that their men's doubles also didn't perform amazingly well. I mean, in Thomas Cup, they can only do so much. They can only win a maximum of 2, which is not enough to win, but it can keep your team in there. And obviously, Malaysia were probably hoping that their doubles could keep them alive, and then their third singles player in Lee Zijia could potentially give them the win. But yeah, they weren't able to do that in that quarterfinal. Aaron Chai and So Yik kept it close with Wang and Liang. It even had a lead in that first, but then it kind of fell away, and that just ran into the second game. But not only this, but I felt that some of the scratch pairings the Malaysian team used didn't make much sense to me. Japan in their group was the big crunch match. So I asked the question, why did they play 2 pairs that hadn't been partnered together prior to that in the previous 2 matches? There was clearly an injury to Man Wei Chong, so T Kai Wun was floating around. In all honesty, against Japan, if they're going to split the pairs, because they still had 2 other pairs, they could have played Aaron Chan, So Yik and Go and Ner, but if they were going to split them, I would have done Aaron Cha and Go Zhifei. You know, they're both very skillful players, have said that they would, I think even Aaron Cha admitted once that if it wasn't for So Yik, he would have liked to have partnered with Go Zhifei, and I think they would have worked. And then I think So Yik and T Kai Wun could have done pretty well, because I see T Kai Wun as a little bit more like an Aaron Cha, whereas we saw So Yik partner with Nur Azudin, who, you know, they're 2 similar players. They're 2 workhorses, which can work. But I think So Yik and Nur himself, they're so used to having a creative player around them. I'm not quite sure that worked. Or failing this against Japan, maybe leave Aaron Cha and So Yik to play together, keep them as the top pair, and then play around with Go and Nur, or Go and T, or Nur and T. One of those, I think. So I'm a little bit confused by the constant splitting, and I'm also a little bit confused as to why Go Zhifei wasn't used as much as he was. I mean, I'm not sure if there's an issue I'm unaware of, but for me, especially recently, with Go and Nur and their good results, Go Zhifei's been the one that's been kind of holding the partnership together a little more. He's the playmaker. He's the player that makes a difference. So the fact that he was only used, I think, in only 1 match, maybe there was an issue. I'm not quite sure. But again, the decisions around them splitting partnerships up and playing around with things, I get the idea. I just was a little bit confused by the ones that they did. So overall, obviously not a great tournament for Malaysia in the Thomas Cup, but there was one saving grace, and that's why I said I want to leave it to the end, and that was Lee Zijia at third singles. He only played 3 times in all 3 of the group matches, and he won all 3, and he got stronger and stronger. And for me, he played very well against England, but didn't really, obviously, against the player Nadim Dalvi, wouldn't need to play at his best. I don't know the name of the former Indonesian player that played for Finland, but again, he probably didn't need to play his best. But it was the match against Koki Watanabe who's a bit of a banana skin for Li Zijia. I'd never beaten him before, played 3 times before, lost every single time. And Koki's style, which uses a lot of sharp drops and tight nets and using the big court, is something that I think Li Zijia does struggle with. So the fact that he was able to defeat Koki Watanabe is absolutely positive. He looked strong. He looked confident. He was hitting good attacking play. He was looked happy on court. There was lots and lots of positives to take away for Li Zijia. And I think another big positive is the fact that after this, his ranking has gone up about 20 spots. So hopefully in the next few individual tournaments, he can carry on that momentum and progress and get back into the top tier of tournaments and even competing to win those, because I still see signs that he can do that. I have heard some talk recently that BAM has invited him, or they're looking at talks of him sparring once a week within BAM, and I think that would be absolutely fantastic for both sides. I think the current men's singles squad inside BAM could really do with getting that kind of experience against Li Zijia. I heard a lot of stories before this tournament that a lot of the players were like inspired by seeing such a former Olympic bronze medalist, All England champion, training amongst their midst, and just it feeding off of them. And obviously if they get a chance to play against him, it's great. And I think obviously for Li Zijia, whilst he can get good sparring partners, the best sparring partners within Malaysia are going to be at BAM because they're the next best player. So I think it works for both ways. I think it's just there's been talks and it's just a little up in the air as to how it's going to work. And, it's probably there's a little bit of bureaucracy as well involved. But yeah, no, there was at least some positives for Malaysia and their Thomas Cup squad. Talking about their women, they also lost in the quarterfinals to China 3-0 as well. I actually commentated on that match, and there was some criticisms going their way. They were hampered, obviously, by the fact that Pearly Tan had to withdraw with a back injury just before the players flew out. And then there was criticism because Tina Muralitharan partnered with, I think, Ong Jin-yi, and they lost to the European silver medalist from Turkey, which was a bit of a surprise result. They had expected Tina, world number 2, to be able to take charge and step up. There was some not as good performances from some of their women's singles players. Again, most specifically in the match against Turkey, actually. I did actually say in my preview that you can't overlook some of those teams like Bulgaria, Turkey, it's not Turkey anymore, Turkey, and other teams like Canada and all those teams. But there was some criticism, but then within it, in their last group match against Japan, and then also in their quarterfinal against China, there were some positives that came about, more specifically around their women's doubles players and some very exciting youngsters. The first one being in that final group game against Japan. They were 4-0 down, and against Rin Iwanaga and Ki Nakanishi, a top 10 pair in the world, Lo Ziyi and Nuraquila Maisara beat them. And those two players, Lo Ziyi is 15 years old, and Maisara is only 18. So two young teenagers came out and defeated a top 10 pair. And these two Malaysians, I looked at their tournaments. They've only just been partnered together before this Uber Cup. And obviously they're going to be partnering moving forward. So very exciting stuff. I mean, the fact they were able to win, I know it was a dead match, but still, the way they played, I was actually rewatching some of the highlights this morning, and they've got some real talent. Lo Ziyi is very tall for a 15-year-old. She reminds me like a Lu Shengshu Tang Ning kind of player. Not explosive and like super quick around the court, but really solid skills, good power, and just belongs on that court. And then Maisara is almost the opposite. She's a lot shorter. She's doing jump smash. She's very quick. She's very sharp with her racket. And I know she's actually a pretty good mixed player and wants to continue that on as well. She obviously wants to do both disciplines. And looking at the way that she plays, her sharp skills would be very handy on a mixed doubles court. I think they do work pretty well together. Obviously, they're two great players, but they clearly want to get Lo to the back and Maisara to the net, but they actually work pretty well the other way around. Because I said, like, Maisara's jump smashing and hitting very sharp angles and variety, and that allows Lo Ziyi to also get involved at the net. So the fact that they can actually work pretty well together in that respect in both formations is a positive sign. I also quite like that there was an interview after it with Maisara, And let's not forget, she's only 18. And the way that she talked about how she's trying to mentor and kind of lead the partnership and be the senior player at only 18, it was very mature of her. She said when talking about Lo Ziyu, sorry, and some mistakes, she's like, mistakes are normal in sports. Every player makes them. She's still so young. She says that like she isn't also young, so she can't expect too much from her, and that she tried to just calm her down on court, don't get angry, try to comfort her so she doesn't panic. All these things, like, you expect that from someone that's been on the tour for a while and taking on a young player. This is an 18-year-old that's still only just out of juniors from last year. I think she might even still be a junior, actually. And she's talking like she's taking on this role. So that's the fact that she's got such a mature head on her shoulders. Another very, very positive sign. But they weren't the only pair that I took notice of, because, like I said, I was on the commentary booth for Malaysia v China, and most people expected it to be 3-0 and a pretty quick match. And actually, whilst it was 3-0 to China, it certainly wasn't a quick match. And actually, one match that went on for, it was like 80 minutes or so, was the women's doubles, where Ong Jin-yi and Carmen Ting went to 3 with Lu Shengshu and Tang Ning. The first and third game, if you look at just the scorelines, were pretty... it sounds pretty straightforward to the Chinese. But that certainly doesn't reflect how the match was played. Even Lu and Tan admitted afterwards that the Malaysians made them have to change their game plan and did make life difficult for them. I felt that Ong and Carmen's defence was absolutely sensational. They were scrapping for everything. Ong Jin-yi, I think I've never seen a player do more dives in one match than she did here. Her singles background definitely came to the forefront. And I think what also impressed me was their attack got better. In the opening games, it was very flat, very one-paced, very one-dimensional, and the Chinese were sitting almost in the back tram lines defending, and you could see there was a few times where they were like lift, and then almost just step back and just like play off into the gap. And it was only really possible because the Malaysians kept hitting just one pace. As the match progressed, I started to see a few different angles, not necessarily playing drop shots and smashes, but more like where their smashes were headed. Were they down at their feet? Were they up at the chest? Were they in the hip? Down the side? To the center? I started to see that kind of variation, whereas at the start it was just, let's just hammer it. And I think it actually got the Chinese to have to, their defense started to weaken a little bit. It started to become harder for them to defend. And when actually what I combined with the fact their defense was so strong, I actually felt that the Chinese became a little bit one-dimensional in the end. And, they had to use a lot of their experience to come through that. So yeah, overall, Malaysia, not the best Thomas and Uber Cup. There's a lot of criticisms, and I think some of them are definitely warranted. But there's also some huge positives, and I think the biggest one, other than Lee Zijia at third singles, is the women's doubles. And when you think that they've got, and I'm pretty sure Ong Jin-yi and Carmen are also teenagers as well. I think they're both 19. So that's 4 players that are teenagers, all with really good potential, and they're all going to be training at BAM, I believe, and with Pearly Tan and Tina Rutheran, who are the number 2 in the world. So that, for me, wow, what an environment that is to just create more excellent women's doubles pairs. So the future is looking pretty bright, I see, for the Malaysian women's doubles squad. Lots can happen, I know. Nothing is guaranteed in this world, in this life, but certainly some positives to take away from the Thomas and Uber Cup finals. Moving on, going to go to Malaysia's neighbours now, the Indonesians. And if Malaysia felt they didn't do particularly well in the Thomas Cup, Indonesia did even worse, because for the first time ever, Indonesia lost in the group stages. They were put out in that absolutely crazy last group match against France. Indonesia have played every Thomas Cup since 1958. So that's quite a long time where they have not failed to get out the groups. It must be admitted that makes it sound, there needs to be some context given. Not every single Thomas Cup. The format for the Thomas Uber Cup has changed. In the old days when Indonesia first played, it was pretty much just semi-finals and finals. It was a knockout stage, and even when groups were created when I played in 2008, it was groups of 3 and every team went through. You just went to different areas. So first time not knocked out in the group stages, it's a smaller time frame than you might think. But I'm pretty sure Jill said it's the first or the second time that Indonesia have failed to make the semi-finals. So it's still pretty seismic. It's obviously made a lot of the rounds on the news, and it's been obviously talked about heavily ever since. And yeah, like I said, they did so in the last group match against France. And it was a rather special night for myself because I was commentating on that match alongside Jill Clark. Let me obviously just quickly run through the match. France had to win that match 4-1 or 5-0. And the French team, I will admit, were not confident that could happen. They were pretty confident they could win the 3 singles. Even then, that was always going to be difficult because Indonesia's single squad is equally as strong. But they felt that, okay, we can get the 3 singles, but the 2 doubles matches, they felt Indonesia, and they did. They had the huge advantage. And so, obviously, when it went down to that 4th match, Indonesia did win the first 3 singles. And then when it went to the 4th match, which was the men's doubles 2, Leo Rossi and Eloy Adam created an absolute mesmeric upset by defeating Gautama and Isfahani. Now, this is a result that will, of course, sting the Indonesians, and one that will require looking at quite a deep level from the coaches and PBSI. But there are some positives, actually, I think, from the Indonesian team. But I will get to those at the end. Always got to finish on a positive. But firstly, one thing, a bit like I said about the Malaysians, team selections by the Indonesian team. Now, I know this is in hindsight, but personally, I think they should have gone with a younger team, more specifically in the men's doubles 2 and possibly even the men's singles 3. So, for me, with the men's singles, it was either going to be, I wasn't sure, I was pretty confident on who Indonesia would field in the first 2 singles and the first doubles, but the men's singles 3 and men's doubles 2, I wasn't sure, but I personally would have liked to have seen Ubaidillah at men's singles 3. Ginting, who did play men's singles 3, lots of experience, but there were concerns, or I had definitely concerns over whether he was going to be match fit. He hasn't played as much badminton. He's been struggling with injuries for a number of years, and even this year has had a few issues as well. I think Indonesia went for the experience on that one, but for me, Ubaidillah, he was put in versus Thailand, and I know the level of the Thai men's singles 3rd player is not as high, nowhere near as high as Thomas Junior Popov, but consider the fact that match there was 2-2, and it was so deciding match. He went out there and he won it convincingly. So for me, if you combine the fact that he probably was a little bit more match fit than Ginting, he'd already proven that he can handle a 2-2 pressure or a pressured situation, which it certainly was. In every match was pretty high pressure in that match against France. And also, I think the fact that him and Thomas Junior had never played against each other, it would have been something a little bit different for Thomas Junior to have to deal with. So yeah, lots of different things that I think would. But this is all in hindsight. Let's not forget Ginting did hold a match point, and he did so even after cramping. He showed tremendous fight. But personally, I think Ubaidillah might have been a better choice. In terms of the doubles, again, I would have gone with Indra and Joaquin. I'm a little bit surprised that they didn't play more of a role in this tournament. Obviously, they got to the All England semi-finals. They've kind of really made a name for themselves and burst onto the scene. I think the only reason why they weren't possibly inexperienced, although it must be said, Gautama and Isfahani, this was their first Thomas Cup as well, is since that All England, I know they haven't had many great performances. The rest of the European tour, I can't remember how they did, but they certainly had some surprising losses. They weren't playing at the level they did at the All England. So maybe that is, and I know that they've had some tough matches against a few of the French pairs that could have played at men's doubles too. So maybe the Indonesian coaches felt they'll go with the older, more experience on the world tour, Gautama and Isfahani. And I think also Gautama and Isfahani were picked because the Indonesians probably felt that Rossi and Adam would be the most likely pair because they are the second ranked pair for France behind the Popovs, and also they had got to the final of the Europeans, which was held in that venue. So those two things combined, it made more sense that they probably would play. And the fact that Gutama and Isfahani had beaten that pair at the Hilo Open the year before. But the reason I questioned their selection as well is it's clear to me Isfahani is still not 100% with his left knee. I personally would have, if it wasn't Indra and Joaquin, maybe a scratch pairing of Gutama and either Indra or Joaquin. That would have been pretty interesting. And I think it would have made more sense against Thailand to have kept Fikri and Alfian at one and then try Gutama with either one. Against Thailand, they had Alfian with Yao Quinn, and I really am confused why, because I couldn't see them ever wanting to use that pair again in later rounds, unless there was some question marks. I did hear some murmurings that Fikri wasn't at 100%. Maybe that's the reason why, but still, the fact that when it came to the crunch match, they still played Alfian and Fikri, I still think they were going to always have them as their top pair. It makes more sense to play around with your next two pairs. Isfahani clearly not fully fit, so it makes sense not to use him as much, a little bit like Manwei Chong from Malaysia. But then put Gutama with Indra and Joaquin if you're going to use a scratch pairing. And I think Indonesia should have used those against Thailand. Personally, that's how I would have seen it. Having said that, though, Alfian and Joaquin only just beat the pair from Thailand, and the fact that they did kind of kept Indonesia a little bit more in the tournament. So yeah, no, there's a lot of toing and froing. A lot of this, obviously, as you know, is kind of discussed in hindsight. So yeah, I don't want to kind of like dive too deep into their match with France. There's lots I could say. I might go into it a little bit because there's going to be a section, obviously, on France because they made the final. But let's talk about that doubles match, because I think that one was the real surprise of it. Like I said, Isfahani was definitely struggling to move as well as I know he can. There's obviously a huge amount of pressure on their shoulders because France were 3-0 up. Expectations were that Indonesia would win both doubles, and if they did, they'd both go through. And then add to that, the French pair were on an absolute. The French pair came out with their team on an absolute high. Their team bench was singing and dancing all night long, and I think that kind of carried them through. But for me, I noticed that Gutama, both of them were nervous, but it kind of manifested in two different ways. Gutama couldn't play touch shots particularly well. Whenever he tried to play some skillful shot, he made a lot of mistakes. And Isfahani was on the opposite. Whenever he tried to hit like a fast shot, an interception or a kill from the net, so many went in the net or out the back because he was just slightly stiff, slightly tight in the forearm. But whilst the Indonesian didn't play well, I felt the French played extremely well. They did get in each other's way a few times, and I think that's because there was a lot of adrenaline going on, but their attack was very well measured, actually much more measured than they were when they faced Gutama and Isfahani before, because I watched their match from the Hilo Open, and there were so many times where their attack was a little bit disorganized, and the Indonesians countered it so easily and so quickly, and I felt that in this particular match in Horsens that their attack was much more controlled. I think they took a few lessons away from the last time they played the Indonesians. Their attack was much more organized. They were linking up better, the right left-handed combination. And yeah, they obviously had they were playing a little bit freer. So yeah, no, that's why they came out on top. But okay. So it wasn't a great tournament for Indonesian Thomas Cup by any measure. I think that can be safely said. I said there were some positives. And for me, the positives are that if you have one eye on the future, they've got a young team with lots of potential that have already shown that potential. Obviously, you've got Awi Farhan, you've got Ubaidallah, and Indra and Joaquin, all young, all exciting players. And all players that I see could be huge parts of Indonesian Thomas Cup teams in the future. If we look 2 years ahead, 2028, it's looking quite likely that Indonesia will be the hosts. And maybe they're looking at now going, oh no, we just lost in the group stages. Are we gonna see that again in 2 years' time? It could happen, but I think there's a lot of excitement. Personally, I'm excited about what the Indonesian team's going to look like in a couple of years. Like those players I mentioned, you've got Christie. I still think, obviously, with the Olympics that year, Christie's still going to be around. Alfie and Fikri and other ones. There's loads of talent. They're still going to have a very, very strong team. If you add to that players that didn't go, you've got Richie Duta Ricardo, who's another young player in the men's singles, very talented. And I've seen other doubles players too. There's two left-handers that I think are also up and coming and starting to kind of show what they're made of. So I think in 2 years, when it could be held in Indonesia, it was still a young team, but an exciting team. So, I think Christie will have a little bit more experience of leading the team. I think that kind of did go against him slightly. He's been so used to playing the second singles role, having to step up to first singles. He wasn't quite able to handle the pressure there. So yeah, I think the fact that Indonesia have a lot of exciting young talent, it shouldn't be all doom and gloom. And again, a little bit like I did with Malaysia, I think there's some positives for Indonesia in the Uber Cup because, again, they got into the semi-final rounds. They were my dark horse, so come on. They lost to Korea in that semi-final. I think it was 3-1, if my memory's serving me right. I didn't write it down. So yeah, no, excellent that the Uber Cup team was able to medal once again. Now, for me, the one main positive actually comes in the women's singles. And I know that might surprise some of you, but I want you to hear me out. I remember watching a lot of Indonesian women's singles when it was their heyday, their strongest years, the years they won the Uber Cup throughout the 90s, basically. And one thing that always stood out to me throughout all their players was the lightness and the foot speed that all their players had. They obviously had the lovely Indonesian skills and, the fight and the determination and all the things that make a good player, but it was their foot speed, how quick and light they were on their feet, that always stood out to me. And I've always felt that since the 2000s and on, they've had some very nice players throughout that time, but the foot speed is something that hasn't been there as much, in all honesty. I've actually got something similar to say about Korean and their men's singles in regard to this. So it was really good to see that, players like Wiriawan and Pratui, who are both teenagers as well, and of course they have plenty of areas to work on, but their foot speed around the court, how light they were and how nimble, I thought that was absolutely really, really positive, and I'm excited to see more of those two in the future. It was also good to see Esther Wadoyo back. She suffered a pretty horrific right tibia fracture last year in September. So the fact that she's back, she's only 21. She was a huge part of them reaching the final 2 years ago. Obviously, Wadani's only 23. She had some tough matches here at the Uber Cup, but she has a bright future. So it's looking really good, and it is nice when you consider that Gregoria Mariska Tunjung is still sadly out with vertigo or effects of that illness. Who knows? Hopefully she can come back. We'll have to see. That can be an illness that could be lifelong. But it's good to see that even if she's not able to, Indonesian women's singles, there is some talent there, and they're clearly working quite hard on their footwork and their ability to cover the court, which I think was always one of Indonesia's strongest suits in their women's singles when they were extremely successful in the 90s. So for me, a huge, huge positive. I said that the next thing I'll talk about actually is similar in respect to another nation whose singles is showing signs of maybe getting into, getting back to a decent level, and that's obviously Korea. So for me, the Korean Thomas Cup team almost went from failure to insane. Obviously the start, there was some question marks. They'd split Kim Won-ho and Seo Sun-jae, which was a bold move, and it didn't quite pay off. It was almost forced because of Kang Min-hyuk's absence. He missed it due to the injury on his right knee after the Asian Championships. You could see actually at that tournament the tape on his knee got worse, bigger and bigger. So I think he's taking some time to rehab it. One eye on the future. But back to the Thomas Cup, Kim Won-ho and Ki Dong-ju lost to Lundgaard and Vestergaard of Denmark. Then Horsens and Jin Yong almost lost to Astrup and Christiansen. That win, 23-21 and third. You think, and there's a few of these results throughout both events, but especially Thomas Cup, these odd wins kept teams in or only just kept them out. There was so much close. I told you in those groups where there was 3 strong teams that very, very difficult. We could have a lot of 3-way ties, and we did. Seo Sung-jae and Jin Yong lost to Wang Qilin and Chu Seung-chae. Then Kim Won-ho and Cho Song-hyun just beat Lee Jue and Yang Po-swan. So, Korea splitting these pairs up and not winning all the doubles where we know that Korea are so strong. There was question marks going, why did it? I know in the commentary team, a lot of people were wondering why Korea was splitting their best pair, especially when the rest of their doubles team pretty strong below. But their men's singles stepped up, especially against Taipei. If you think they were 2-0 down against Taipei, Yu Tae-bin had lost to Cho Chin-chen, and then Seo Sung-jae and Jin Yong had lost to Wang and Chu. And then so you had, out of the remaining 3 matches, 2 singles. And let's be honest here, Korean men's singles, we know they're not known for their men's singles strength, and it's certainly going through this even worse at the moment. It's going through a rebuilding phase completely. But their singles squad, but starting with Choi Ji-hyun and then Cho Hyun-woo, pulled off 2 fantastic wins and actually sealed a 3-2 win, which actually kept Korea in the tournament. They had chances to qualify, and they only missed out by 1 point, because on the final day they won 5-0 against Sweden, as expected, and then all they needed was Denmark to beat Chinese Taipei 3-2, 4-1 or 5-0, and they'd been through. And Denmark lost 3-2, and in the deciding singles, Ditlev Jägerholm had 5 match points. So had he converted on one of those, Korea would have gone through to the knockout stages. That's how close it was in that group. But, like I said, the men's singles players for Korea really impressed me. Heading into this Thomas Cup, the only one that not the only one I knew of, but the only one that had impressed me prior was Yu Tae-bin, and that's because I'd seen his performances at the Asian Men's Team Championships where he beat Ayeshetti, Lin Chun-yi. I thought he had a very good game, strong, powerful attack, good mover, excellent net skills, lots of good qualities about him. I'd seen the others, Choi Ji-hyun and Cho Hyun-woo more specifically, and whilst they were okay, nothing about their game truly stood out to me. That thought, or that thinking of them, completely changed. I was really surprised at how much Choi Ji-hyun and Cho Hyun-woo had improved since then. And actually, I mentioned Ditlev, the third men's singles player for Denmark. On the final day before I was leaving, I bumped into him. We know each other because he grew up in the same county as me, actually. He grew up playing for England, fun fact. And he said that, I played against these guys only a few months ago. I saw them play, and their level compared to then, I don't know what training they've been doing, but their level has gone up absolutely crazy amount. Now, okay, what really stands out for me? I said about Indonesian women's singles and the foot speed. What really stood out to me with this crop of Korean men's singles is how often they could get into the dead jump situation. So I mean, that is the jump smash with 2 foot underneath the shuttle, jump up, attack. Other than, say, Sean Won-ho in the last 10 years, and maybe Jun Hook Jim when he was younger, although he was never the best mover around the court, Korean men's singles have looked a bit heavy. They've had good basic skills, but they've looked a bit slow. They can't jump up and exert pressure, all this kind of stuff. All of the singles players I saw, and this includes, to an extent, Park Sang-yong, who played the first match against Denmark, then wasn't played again, how quick they were at playing their net, and then it would be a cross lift to that line, and they could, all 3 of them, Yu Tae-bin, Choi Ji-hyun, and Cho Hyun-woo, move back, jump up, and hit an attack. That I have not seen in Korean Korean men's singles for over a decade. So for me, that stood out to me. They obviously move really well. They've got good technique, strong legs, very Korean, all this kind of stuff. But it was that small factor I noticed in all of them. They all have different links, different styles. Yu Bin and Cho Hyun Woo are much more classical Korean, very strong, good rally game, but they certainly have a good attack on top of that, which is something they need. Choi Ji-hyun, much more of the attacking player. Some of his attacking play when he was in full flow, especially when he played Chiyu Jen against Taipei, was absolutely phenomenal. He really impressed me with his attack. And I think their improvements, or Korea men's singles showing signs that there's something for the future, I think stems from the fact that Park Ju-bong is sending a lot more Korean teams out to European events or to the International Challenging Series events and sending them on a 1 month, 6 weeks tour and just getting all this tournament experience. When I was a young player, I saw a lot of Japanese players. I remember seeing Kenichi Tago and Kento Momota and a lot of other players playing the circuit, whether it was in Europe or in Australia or wherever it may be, gaining lots of experience. I've seen Chinese Taipei do it, with a lot of basically their team this year outside of Cho Chin Chen. Even he played European tournaments a long time ago. But I can remember first seeing Lin Chun-yi at a small tournament in Australia, and there was a whole host of them, and they were all playing them. And it's just that way of getting experience. I've never seen Korean players do this before. And I think the fact that Japan did it and it was successful, and that was clearly a Park Ju-bong initiative, I think he's doing the same in Korea. And I think that's why, at this event, we've seen Korean men's singles make a little bit of a name for themselves. I said this in my commentary because I did commentate on Korea versus Sweden. And one thing I said was that whilst this isn't the first time we've seen Korean singles players, especially the men, perform really well at a team event, but then when it goes back to the regular tournaments, we don't really hear much, and then the next team event comes and suddenly they pull off wins. We've seen that in the past. Who can not forget their last Asian Games where I can't remember where they got to, semis, or I think it was the semi-finals, but they defeated, it might have been Indonesia, I can't quite remember, but the point I'm making is they can suddenly kind of know of the team events, but then you don't hear of them. For me, the big question is going to be, yes, they've shown great promise at this Thomas Cup. Huge improvements in just a couple of months. But if I'm lucky enough to be part of the Thomas Cup commentary team in 2028 and Korean men's singles is in the same boat, it must be seen as a failure. We must start to see 1, 2, or even 3 of these Korean players that we saw here, or there's probably a couple of those back at home. We need to see them in the 750s and the 1000s by next year. Maybe even by the end of this year. That might be a bit of a stretch, but who knows. Next year could be a little easier in the thousands because the singles events are growing in size, so that might be a bit easier for them to get in the door. But from the potential I saw and the way that they played, those players should be on the World Tour. And if they're not, then there needs to be some more serious questions. But things are looking very positive for the Korean men's singles. And let's be honest, if they do, with how strong their doubles lineup is, by 2028 or 2030, Korea could finally have a team that might just suddenly turn 2 of those silvers they've had into a gold. It's the only tournament that Korea hasn't won is the Thomas Cup. So that's quite a crazy thing to consider. But based on what I saw, potentially we could see Korea being one of the big contenders for the title. So exciting to kind of see how that progresses into the future. Obviously, I can't talk about Korea without talking to them about their Uber Cup team, because for the 3rd time they won the Uber Cup, and for the 3rd time it was China that they defeated in the final. Many saw China as the favourites. I certainly did. But as was pointed out to me after the fact, in the last 3 team competitions, now 4, that China and Korea faced each other. So that's the 2022 Uber Cup final, the Asian Games Team Championships in 23, earlier this year at the 2026 Asia Women's Team Championships, and obviously now the 2026 Uber Cup. Korea has defeated China in 4 women's team championship matches. That's pretty good fact. But the funny thing is, the same guy that pointed out to me said, "But if they play each other a fifth time, so same as the next Uber Cup or whenever they may face each other again, it could even be the Asian Games later this year. Again, people probably will have China as the favourites." And I was like, "Yeah, they probably will because of how strong they are individually. But clearly, there's something Korea when it comes to the team. They can bring it together and bring out their best performances, especially when they're playing China." And that's clearly true because in the final, let me quickly run through it. Obviously, Seong versus Wang Ziyi. Everyone expected a long and hard drawn out match, but it wasn't. Seong was in absolute beast mode. She was assertive and aggressive. And to be honest, Wang Ziyi played a similar level to what I've seen of her in the rest of the event. And, I called her match against Malaysia. She did not look particularly comfortable, impressive. And actually, every match I saw of Wang Ziyi, she looked a bit nervous, even against Yamaguchi. Not her best performance. And I felt that Seong was the opposite. And I wasn't surprised that Seong managed to win that match. I think there is quite a lot of pressure on Wang Ziyi in team events, especially in big matches. We all remember her losing to Sim Yoo-jin in the 2022 final. She played the Sudirman Cup final against Seong, and while she didn't play badly, it wasn't her best match, especially against Seong. And I think even in 2024, she wasn't really needed all too much because China won so easily. But yeah, no, Seong pretty much never gave away the advantage in the rally. If Wang Ziyi managed to get it at the start of the rally, she had a mild chance. But Seong, if she got the advantage, Wang Ziyi could not steal it from her. In fact, no one in this tournament could steal it from her. I was right courtside for that Seong Wang Ziyi match, and Wang Ziyi was blowing really hard, even from the first game, because she just couldn't find a way to control any of the rallies. Women's doubles, you had obviously Park Ju-bong splitting the pairs. They split up Lee So-hee and Baek Ha-na, and split up Jung Na-yeon and Kim Hee-jong, who had played together at second doubles. And I think the reason they did that is probably they felt that Baek Ha-na and Lee So-hee probably didn't have much of a chance against Lewin Tan if they were on top form, but maybe the fact that Baek Ha-na and Kim Hee-jong had beaten Jai Fan and Zhang Shushan at the Asia Team Championships, maybe there was a chance to win that one. A risky thing, because in all honesty, if Korea were going to win it, most people probably felt that it was going to be with Seong and the two doubles. But, Park Ju-bong clearly had the faith. But in that first doubles, Lewin Tan, a bit like Seong, completely controlled the match. They never really looked too uncomfortable. And the big thing for me is whenever it was close or in the 50-50 areas. So, I talk about that, when we're looking at mid-court drives and pushes or service situation. In those 50-50 areas, it was 99 times out of 100 or 9 times out of 10. China, Liu and Tan were the pair that were coming out of that with the slight advantage or getting the attack more. And then when they had the attack, it was very difficult for Jung and Lee to kind of get it back or to even survive long enough. So yeah, it was a pretty straightforward win for Liu and Tan. Next came when it was 1-1. I was there, and with a number of things, I felt it was going to be 2-1 to China. Chen Yufei, with her vast experience, being a former Olympic champion, had led China to numerous team competitions. In fact, she holds the record of most team finals and team titles out of current players. I think this was her 19th team final. Absolutely extraordinary. And then combine that fact that Kim Ga-yeon, her opponent, I'm sorry to say it, but she had been very, very poor with her performances. Numerous errors and barely, it was not good performance by Kim Ga-yeon throughout the whole tournament. But it comes to the final, and she pulled out the best performance. When Korea needed her, she pulled out an absolutely sublime performance. At the start, Chen Yufei had the advantage, seemed to be in control. Kim Ga-yeon's knee was heavily taped, and Chen Yufei was playing the big court, especially bringing it all the way forward. You can tell Kim Ga-yeon wasn't particularly comfortable. She looked a bit unsure of her shot. She was playing safe. She wasn't doing what we know that she can do. She was playing similar to how we'd seen earlier, and Chen Yufei just didn't really look in too much trouble. And I remember thinking, I can't remember what the score was, but I think at the halfway point in the first, and it looked like Chen Yufei was in control. And I looked down at my phone, you just kind of like, always paying attention. I was like, this is going to be pretty straightforward. I'll glance up. Next thing I glanced up, and it was Kim Ga-eun in the lead. And I was like, what the hell's happened? So then I watched intently. And Kim Ga-eun played with much more purpose. She made far less errors. Holy hell. She dropped her error rate by an absolute massive amount. And I also do think that Chen Yufei, she admitted this after her match against Miyazaki in the semis, that by the end of the second, she was running on pretty much fart fumes. She had absolutely nothing left. She looked exhausted. I've never seen Chen Yufei play so many backhands in my life. She was clinging on. I don't know whether she had any issues, but she certainly wasn't at full fitness. But Kim Ga-eun still had to go out there and win, and I think that Kim Ga-eun maintained pressure on Chen Yufei perfectly. Didn't go for the all-out attack too early. She kept her patience. She worked Chen Yufei around the court. She kept her error rate down. She kept her sharpness, her pace high. She nailed the height perfectly so Chen Yufei couldn't intercept. She got her to play those backhands. Yeah, it was a really, really good performance for me by Kim Ga-eun. I felt that, like I said, Chen Yufei was certainly not at full fitness, and I think because of that, she played a few situations a little too obviously. One was she played in the first game, she played a forehand cross-court lift a little too often, almost to the point that at 19-20, it got into that situation, and Kim Ga-eun turned her feet and was ready and just jumped on it. Like, she knew it was going to go to that corner. So Chen Yufei played a little predictably, which usually happens if someone is a bit tired and can't really think about the game. Because as soon as your mind goes to thinking, oh, I'm not very fit, and focusing on this, it comes away from that. You can only play tactically really well at this level of badminton if physically you're feeling confident and you're feeling good in yourself, and Chen Yufei clearly didn't, and it started to affect all sorts of areas. So yeah, no, fair play to Kim Ga-eun, which gave it 2-1, and I still felt okay. I must admit, I didn't know of the fact that Kim Hee-jong and Baek Ha-na had beaten Zhang and Jia at the Asia Team Championships. I thought that it would be, again, China going to level it on the doubles, and then what an interesting battle in the third singles. Han Yue having had a bit of a bad season so far. Sim Yoo-jin having, again, a bit like Kim Ga-eun, not the best of times at this tournament, but from what I've just seen, maybe there's pressures, and we know Sim Yoo-jin had pulled off a deciding match win over China 4 years ago. I was kind of looking forward. I was already looking ahead to that. And then when Jia and Zhang won the opening game against Baek Ha-na and Lee So-hee, and they seemed to be attacking well, it was the fact that they played together more seemed to really be the deciding factor. They were rotating around each other nicely. They knew who should take what, and they were slotting into positions, and everything was looking good for China. They won the first game. And then again, a little bit like the singles, I was like, okay, here we go. And then I look away for a few minutes. Next time I look, Korea's are like 9-2 up in the second or something. I'm like, oh, what's happened here? And if I had to give you an answer to that question, it would be that the Koreans' defense was absolutely phenomenal. The shuttles, I think, did play a little slower on finals day than they did the rest of the week, but you could not get through Kim Hee-jong and Baek Ha-na. It took an absolute monumentous effort. And I think the fact that they kept fighting and getting everything back, and getting it back with purpose. What I just said about the Chinese were working well. They were like a well-oiled machine. They knew they were like attacking like this. They were attacking like this. I started to see them started to almost take each other's shots. There started to be some doubt. They were starting to force their attack a little bit more, and they're getting in each other's way, and there was miscommunications, and I could see it starting to break down on the Chinese side, and the Koreans, I think, took even more positiveness from that, and their defense got even stronger. Their defense was a huge deciding factor, and I think whilst it takes two to tango, Kim Hee-jong was as tough as nails in that match, because she must have played 90% of the shots. I did a story where I joked that Kim Hee-jong was playing not just women's doubles 2, but women's singles 3 in the same match. She was working incredibly hard. Yet she didn't give away any easy errors. She kept her intensity throughout. She varied her attack really nicely. If she got to the front court, she made decisive moves. Yeah, just really, really impressive from Kim Hee-jong. I've seen a few comments online and some other people saying that why did Jian Zhang stick with that tactic of pinning it on Kim Hee-jong? They should have maybe changed it up. I don't know why. Maybe that would have been a solution. Because obviously Kim Hee-jong's defense was up to task, Baekhyun's was strong, but maybe changing up. I did think the Chinese's attack, like I said, they were getting each other's way a little more than they were in the first game, but they also started to just hit everything hard. There started to be less variety. And whenever that happens, it's only going to feed into how strong your opponent's defense was. So yeah, no, I felt that the Chinese did look pretty rattled. And I think once the Koreans got a really good start in the third, the pressure of the fact that this was, if China lost, they were going to lose the whole tournament, and probably maybe they were thinking of the Asia Team Championships early in the year. I think a number of things, and the Koreans just, like in these team events, the momentum, it snowballs, 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 and it was going in their way, and it was going against the Chinese, but absolutely brilliant stuff from Team Korea. Next, the last one before I'm going to get onto a load of questions is obviously I have to talk about my dark horse pick in the Thomas Cup, and that's the French team. Now, there is an elephant in the room when it comes to the French team because everyone has been talking about their lineup. In fact, I'm pretty sure the majority of this whole comment section could be dominated by that. Don't worry, I will address my thoughts on that at the end of the video. I think I don't want to kind of blend the two because I don't want... You'll see why, but I think it is important that we give huge props to the French team for their fantastic result of reaching the final, and also for helping me keep my Thomas Cup dark horse run going, because in 2022, India were my Thomas Cup dark horse, and they got their first medal and won the whole thing. 2 years ago, I picked Chinese Taipei, and they got their first ever medal, and this year, I picked France, and they got their first medal, and even reached the final. And it was a really impressive turnaround by the French team, because in the opening day they lost 4-1 to Thailand, and I know the team was hugely deflated because even in the fifth match, the doubles between the Popovs, and it was Teratsukan and Pakpon, I think, if I'm remembering rightly, the Popovs didn't go all out, which I found surprising, because in both group matches where we had three strong teams, every match seemed to count. We saw that in Korea, in their group, and it was the same in the group with France, Indonesia, and Thailand. I think had they played at full tilt and had managed to win that match, it might have made their lives against Indonesia easier. In that match, there was a lot of worrying things for the French team, not just the fact they lost, but for me, Christo Popov looked extremely nervous against Kunlut-Vitit-San. Obviously, there's the pressure. France know that they need to win through pretty much the singles, which does put a lot of pressure. We've seen it get in the way of Denmark over the last couple of editions, and it felt like France were the same. He was breathing really heavy in the first 11. Like that nerve, like if you're so nervous, it can make you tired. He did relax near the end of the second. He kind of got into it, but it was a little too late. Then I felt Alex Lanier came on at second in singles against Panichapon and looked very heavy-handed and nervous himself. He's been struggling, I know, with some motivational issues after the All England and his tournaments since, and it really showed. He looked a little bit lackluster. He didn't look quite there, and I think he played very narrow and heavy-handed, a little bit similar to what I saw of him at the All England and also at the European Championships. Toma Junior Popov was good. Obviously, he won the 1 point, but to be fair, his opponent wasn't of his level. And I think, obviously, men's doubles 2 was a close match, but it was the start of the third for the ties for Deechpon and Rutanapak. They got like 11-1 up in that third, and it was pretty much game over. But, like I said, what a turnaround. They lost 4-1. They then beat Algeria 5-0, as all the other teams did. And it meant that when they went in against Indonesia, they needed 4 matches, which I'd already spoken about earlier when talking about Indonesia. A lot of pressure. Obviously, the lineup starting with the 3 singles, they knew they had to win all three, because if they didn't win all three, it gave no chance, pretty much, because Indonesia was so strong in the doubles. They managed to do it. Christo versus Christie was a battle of players taking on that role of responsibility of leading the team. Both were a little cagey. It only really ramped up at the end of the first, and Christo took that first game, and that ran into the second game. He kind of kept that ball rolling, that momentum going, and took the second. Lanier against Farhan. Lanier came out like a bull in a china shop. Clearly no tactical play whatsoever. It was more just heart on your sleeve, just go out there and absolutely give it everything. And I think he kind of stunned Farhan, who was feeling was naturally nervous. But once he relaxed, I felt that the game became very competitive. There was just a couple of things I felt Lanier took advantage of. One was that the one thing about Farhan, he does commit forward quite easily, and Lanier would hold him on the net and then just push him into the backhand corner. And there was a lot of times he got Farhan to take the late backhand, and that kind of gave him a way in. He could bring in the front court, pull Farhan to commit forward, and then he could hold him and push him away, and it kind of worked pretty well. But he also managed to just get over the line. Toma versus Ginting was always, I think, going to be epic. Their last couple of matches have gone to 3. Their worlds ended so dramatically, unfortunately, with an injury to Ginting. And sadly, in this match, pretty much happened the same way. It was very tight. Ginting had the advantage, but then he tripped over, and that seemed to exacerbate his cramp that he had. He was showing signs earlier that he was stretching his calf. He fought on diligently and valiantly, and he did have a match point, but Thomas saved it and then converted it on his first one. And then I've already spoken about the men's doubles. It was a really good turnaround, and I think they should be given huge credit, not just because they managed to beat Indonesia 4-1, but I know that the team were absolutely devastated and distraught after losing the opening match to Thailand 4-1. There was a number of, just not just as a whole team, but there was a few individual things, and they rallied behind each other. And I know the team really got behind Alex Lanier and really kind of tried, because he was having those motivational issues and was feeling a bit down. They really got behind him and lifted him, and you could see that in the team bench when they played Indonesia. They were singing and dancing and getting into it even more, and they really kind of pushed their team. And then they kept that momentum going into the knockout stages. Versus Japan, I didn't see too much of that match because I was prepping for my own match. But Toma Jr., I think for me, again, I'll talk about the lineup situation, but the fact that Toma Jr. Popov had never beaten Koki Watanabe before, in the 2 times or 3 times that they faced before. So to get his first win over him is such a huge match, such an important match, I think was absolutely huge. And I think, the France had the momentum, but the fact that Japan and like all other teams they faced from then on out had strong singles teams, that's big. Against India, again, the momentum, the ball was rolling. They were helped slightly by the fact that Lakshya Sen was unable to play because against Cho Chin Chen the day before, he had done some big dives and had banged his elbow, and the reports were that it was not fully fit, and he also was suffering from blisters. That certainly gave France a slight edge. Christo India pushed up Ayush Shetty to number 1. I'll talk about Ayush a bit later. He gets a question, but I think against Christo played tactically perfectly against Ayush Shetty. He had a clear game plan. He was pushing up the court from the word go. He took all the time away from Ayush, not allowing him to settle. I loved his combination when he did step forward, between moving him all the way forward, the perfect height over him, and these kind of half pushes in and around the body. So every time Ayush took it late, he didn't know what was coming next. And then if he did try to clear it out, I think the shuttles flew a little fast in that day. It was hard to control the back, so he wasn't doing it as much. But if he did, Christo was very quick on getting onto the attack. So every time Christo got Ayush to take it slightly late, you could see that Ayush didn't feel particularly settled. When Ayush played Lin Chun-yi the day before, Lin Chun-yi was not doing those kind of things. And so Ayush could kind of, when he was a bit late, didn't feel as much pressure. Christo absolutely went on him from there, right from the word go. And it just it paid off tenfold down the line as the match progressed. If Ayush got a half chance in the attack, he went for it and made some mistakes. He was hitting at the back, trying to hit a little bit faster. When he played to the net and Christo closed it down, you could see that he was a little bit tense and then lifting up a little bit easier. The way that Christo just kind of made that match go where he wanted it to go, absolutely brilliant performance. Alex Lanier, I didn't think he played particularly brilliantly against Kadambi, and I think he was fortunate in my eyes that Kadambi isn't as quick as he used to be, and also the fact that he was probably was lacking a bit of match sharpness because he hadn't played since day one, because he wasn't selected in the future matches because Pranoy played against Canada and China. And so I think he hadn't played in over a week, so he just lacked a little bit of sharpness. Because I think had Kadambi been match sharpened, had it been 2 to 4 years ago, Lanier would have lost that because he tried to keep engaging him in like tight net battles and playing with big deceptions. And against someone like Kadambi, where that's his bread and butter, he was always going to lose. And whenever he tried to play that game, Kadambi came out on top. It did actually leave me a little bit confused when I was calling that match, because Lanier pulled away because he was playing very simple deception from the net, but pushing into the corners, playing with pace, trying to play the fast game, beating Kadambi that way. And it opened up a big, like 15-10 lead or something like that. And then he started to play big deceptions, playing back to the net, playing soft shots. And Kadambi got himself back into it. I personally think that Alex didn't play very well and was actually fortunate to win that. Toma versus Pranoy, it was a good match. It's a little similar pattern to their All England from last year, where Pranoy had chances in the first, was somewhat leading or it was even, but then let it slip rather easily and tamely at the end. In the second game, Thomas started to settle a little bit more. He was a little bit gun-ho, understandably. We'll see what was on the line. But once Thomas started to play a little calmer, a little bit more variety, and when that happened, and with France momentum, I remember thinking in my head, I think France are going to do this. This is looking very good for them, and that's how it turned out. What I will say when it comes to their match against India, and even I'll extend this to Japan when it comes to France, we all know that to defeat France, you had to win one of the singles, obviously in the knockout stages, because they were playing their 3 singles first. Had it gone to the doubles against Japan and also India, I still think France would have had chances. I think against India, if it had gone to the final doubles, Shetty and Ranki Reddy, the way they played in their quarterfinal, it was India's. I think India would have beaten the Popovs. But the second doubles, that would have been interesting because the French pair showed they can play a high level when they played against Qatar and Isfahani. And also India's second doubles pair haven't brought many wins. When India won in 2022, they didn't win a single knockout match. And I think even in 2024 in the quarterfinals, I'm not sure if they actually got to the second doubles, but if they did, I know they probably didn't win that one either. So yeah, India's second doubles pair is relatively weak, especially in comparison to their first doubles. So I think the French versus Indian, had it gone to the fourth match, could have been interesting. And against Japan, they had some untested pairs. Obviously, they didn't have Hoki and Kobayashi. They didn't seem to want to use Hoki and Midorikawa, which I think was actually a good move because I don't think they would have worked together all too well. They stuck with their lesser known but more solidified pairs. And whilst I still would have had Japan as favourites, their lack of experience in the situation, there would have been, I think, chances for France. But it didn't go that far because France pulled off the 3 singles wins. And then in the final, obviously, they lost to China 3-1. We always knew they needed to probably win the 3 singles because China's doubles pairs are super strong. Quickly running through those matches, Xiu Qi versus Christo was absolutely fantastic. Xiu Qi found something in that third because to me, it looked like Christo had it. He had that momentum. He looked a little stronger at the end. Xiu Qi obviously having his illness issues early in the week. Maybe that was starting to he wasn't firing all cylinders, but he dug deep. I absolutely loved the net battles those two had. There was we always talk about singles, there's the net battle and the fight for the net. But in that one, particularly, both players wanted to attack a lot. And the only way they're going to do that was to win the net. There was so many little cross net, tight net exchanges. It was absolutely phenomenal. There was shifts in momentum at the end, but it was Xiu Qi came on top. And like I've said a few times about some other matches, Christo just making a few errors at the end. Alex Lanier, night and day compared to his semi-final. He blasted Li Shifeng off the court. He utilised the front court more like I felt he should have done against Kadambi. where if he played to net, it was just very simple deceptions, but a lot of just lift, and then occasionally play to the net just to keep it open, keep the court big, not playing too many big deceptions and all this kind of stuff. Talking about his deceptions, I think his backhand deceptions have certainly improved, a bit more creative and noticeable. But in that match against Li Shifeng, he played with fantastic pace. He didn't really let up, and I felt he attacked with good variety and accuracy. I know Li Shifeng did beat Laksha earlier in the tournament, and he got a lot of wins, but Li Shifeng's level was way down on what we know. Wang Hongyang versus Thomas Jr. was absolutely epic and a little feisty at times. The emotions were running high. There was a huge intensity. I felt both players were attacking off balance a fair bit, and they were, again, a bit like all singles, a massive battle for the net. Thomas with his pressing, and then Wang Hongyang, sorry, trying to be a little bit more deceptive and open up the big court. You know, there's always been those battles with whoever Thomas faced. That's kind of how I saw things going. In that match, there was I saw Wang Hongyang occasionally dip in and dip out of intensity, but when it mattered, especially in the third game, it was a huge effort by him, especially at the front of the court in the third. And yeah, the fact that he won it on that deceptive return at 19-20 kind of sums up that front court deceptions and the battle that both players were having. I think had Thomas been able to nick that, because it was such a close and intense battle, had it been 2-1 to France, I think maybe that second men's doubles would have been more interesting. But as it wasn't, I think the bubble had slightly burst on the French, and obviously the Chinese pair of He Jiting and Ren Changyu delivered the winning points, which I found quite funny that it was. He Jiting, Ren Changyu, obviously they've only just come back, and with all the stories around He Jiting and some of the things he said, I think it was quite funny in a way that he was the one that won it for China. They beat Rossi and Adam pretty convincingly. So yeah, say what you want about France's order and the advantage it might have given them. They still had to go out and win, and they did. And to come back from their loss to Thailand on day one, to me, is commendable and can't be overlooked. Yeah, so yeah, you can say what you think of the order of play, but you can't take away from the performances of their single players, even their whole team. But like I said, I will get into the lineup and that kind of stuff a little later on, because it's one of the last questions I'm going to answer. So Q&A, number of questions here. And as you can tell, I've already been speaking for, I don't know how much I will get edited out, but on my clock, it's 1 hour and 15 minutes. There's a lot to talk about, like I said, and it's not going to get any shorter. So get yourself comfortable, everyone. So first question, who do you think underperformed and overperformed in terms of the player itself, and as well as the country in both the Thomas and Uber Cup? That's a pretty broad question, but I picked it because it gives me a chance to talk about some other players individually. I think for me personally, it's difficult to answer, as whilst there were certainly some teams who didn't live up to expectations. I've already spoken about 2 of them, Malaysia and Indonesia in the Thomas Cup, are kind of the big ones, especially Indonesia not making it out of the group stages. And there are certainly some teams I felt actually did better than I expected. Denmark in the Thomas Cup being an absolute huge one. I did not expect them. I thought they could potentially lose in the group stages. But they put in some great performances and even reached the semi-finals. I think this question's better for me to talk about players individually. And even then, there are some players, and I've already mentioned a couple of them, who didn't perform particularly well, but then who suddenly had a great performance, and vice versa. So let's go through a few of them. So for me, underperformed or not great throughout the event. My top one here is actually Kim Ga-eun. She was not the best all the way through, but like I said, her performance in the final was absolutely outstanding. She pulled it out when it mattered most, I guess, because I think had she lost it, China probably would have won, although I wouldn't like to say for certain on that one. Second one, Wang Ziyi, I've put here. She never really stood a chance against Eun Seong in the final, but in all honesty, throughout the whole event, she wasn't looking particularly strong. I called her match against Lesthana against Malaysia in the quarterfinals, and while she came through in straight games, it was by no means convincing. She looked nervous. She broke a lot of strings on mishits. She didn't look particularly like she was moving well, or all the things that basically the level I saw she played at the All England. I didn't really see any of that here. I think the pressures of the team environment are still something that she's getting used to. Tomoka Miyazaki, she didn't get many wins, and she also lost some unexpected matches, one being to Neslihan Arin of Turkey. But some positive. I think she did actually improve as the event went on. But it must be said, her current form dip is continuing. She's still got a lot of work to kind of get herself out of a hole, but she showed some good badminton in patches, but overall, I think she didn't perform as well as she could have, and possibly with the fact that, if we look a little bit to the future, Yamaguchi, how much longer is she going to be around? We might see her retire after LA, so she might have one more Uber Cup. Miyazaki's going to be... I know they've got some other talented players around, but at the moment, it seems like Miyazaki could be the one to lead the team, and at the moment, I'm not sure she's in a position to do so, but she's got the ability to turn it around. I've already mentioned Li Shifeng. Like I said, he did beat Lakshya Sen and won most of his games, but he looked vulnerable throughout. I mean, he was even pushed by Shrey Dand of Australia. I know he rolled his ankle at last year's World Tour Finals, and has had injury issues before, but it makes me wonder whether he should have taken out a longer time to fully heal. I remember after the Olympics, I'm pretty sure I heard some things that he was going to have some sort of surgery or take time out to fully heal. And I don't think we actually seen that. So I fear he will continue this cycle of up and down performances, and we might see him even fade a little. I've seen it from other top Chinese men's singles players in the past who just can't seem to get over niggling injuries that keep coming back. And then combine that with the fact that China just have, conveyor belts of talent that we might have already seen the best of him. But I hope not, because when he's on full power, when he's in playing at full power mode, he's a frightening player, but he looks like a shadow of his former self at the moment. I think Taiwanese singles in the Thomas Cup, Chiyu Zhen and Li Chahao. Again, for Chiyu Zhen, he pulled out that clutch match against Ditlev. Had he lost that, Chinese Taipei wouldn't have made it into the knockout stages. But he also lost to Choi Ji-hoon of Korea. I know I gave props to the Chinese singles, but still, Chiyu Zhen is a player that is playing on the World Tour and was expected to win. So I don't think he ever played poorly throughout this tournament, but he certainly wasn't as good as I've seen him. In Li Xiaohao, we know that, All England finalist 2 years ago or a year ago. He also, against Choi Hyun-woo, he lost that deciding singles. Choi Hyun-woo is only 19 years old. Again, he also didn't look particularly good against the player from Sweden. Yeah, his level, he's struggling to kind of refine some good form. But yeah, overall, I think they underperformed to what I know they're capable of. And lastly, I put Chen Yufei. Now, Chen Yufei is a class act, but for whatever reason, she looked physically drained and weak at the Uber Cup. She admitted, like I said, at the end of her match with Miyazaki in the semi-finals, that she was running on fumes by the end. And in the final versus Kim Go-yeon, she looked exhausted. She took more backhands than I've ever seen before. So, for someone who's played in so many major finals, and she's a class act. She fought with everything she got, and I know that she's also coming back from injuries. She's been struggling ever since she rolled her ankle at the World Championships last year. And I know that she's not had many tournaments where she's been fully fit. She's had to withdraw at a few big tournaments in the latter stages. So I know there's that factor, but, she certainly didn't play up to the level that we know that she's capable of. In terms of overperformed or just impressive, I've got 4 here. Again, these aren't all of them, so please do add to this list. But Seong, she was exceptional throughout, even by her own high standards. Someone said to me, I think it was a question, not that I'm going to answer it, but they asked, is she preparing for the scoring system change 3 to 15? Because in every match she played, had it been to 15, she would have won. I think maybe that there is some validity to that question. Maybe she is. She certainly looked very strong. She attacked more. The more I watch her, the more she's starting to play like Lee Kun-il, who is her new coach. And yeah, no, she played exceptionally well. Aya Shetty, I've put him here. He impressed me in his quarterfinal win over Lin Chun-yi, the All England champion, and also his overall performance. He had some big wins early in the week. He had a good win against Brian Yang, who was a potential banana skin, especially given that India were 1-1 at that stage because Victor Lai had defeated Lakshya Sen. I think going in that match, had India gone down 2-0, maybe at the second doubles where they do have some weaknesses, they could have lost that match and been knocked out of the tournament. But no, Ayashetty pulled out the win over Brian Yang convincingly. He beat Weng Hong Yang in India's only win over China, and he also defeated Lin Chun-yi. I know Lin Chun-yi wasn't fully fit; he was heavily taped up, and he was probably playing at about 70% capacity. But the fact that Ayashetty went out there and delivered the win, and he delivered a convincing win, for me, it showed great maturity for the 20-year-old. In the semi-final, when he had to lead the team, it was a whole different ball game. He was up against a French team with momentum, Christo playing extremely well, and he didn't quite handle that situation well. But I think overall, I still would say that he put in some very impressive performances. Talking of French, Thomas Junior Popov has to be there. The French team obviously did phenomenally well, but he pulled off some huge clutch wins and almost did it in the final two. Getting his first ever win over Koki Watanabe in the quarters against Japan was great stuff. And yeah, no, he pulled off some brilliant wins. And lastly, I mentioned her already, Kim Hee-jong. What a warrior in the final, and in fact played in all the matches throughout the entire tournament and won all of them, only dropping a game in that final against Zhai Fan and Zhang Chushan. And the fact that she played with not her regular partner, because Kong Hee-yong is injured, didn't travel to Horsens. She played with Jung Na-yun and then Baek Ha-na. And what makes her make the list is the fact, like I said, in that final, she was getting picked on over and over again, yet she just hung tough and played absolutely phenomenally and delivered the winning points for Korea to win the whole thing. So like I said, there are many others, I'm sure, so do add them into the comment section. Moving on, next question. This one's a quite quick one. Should they allow those loud horns in future tournaments? No, they shouldn't. No. I know on the broadcast it was coming across loud, and some people even said they could barely hear the commentary because of it. Imagine what it was like where our commentary booth was sat. Just beneath it was about 4 or 5 rows of spectators, and then it was the team benches, and we were very close to them. And the team, especially the Chinese Taipei team, they had about 3 or 4 different types of horn. They were blowing it, and you could barely, if you had the headset off, I couldn't hear my co-commentator who was sat right next to me. It was that loud. Personally, I'm not showing my age here, but those horns were irritating. The bangers and the clappers and all the other stuff and the drums, we even had teams playing music between points. The Taipei team also playing serene music, which was kind of a contrast because they were the ones also blowing the horns. But no, in answer to your question, I think those horns should be banned because it disrupts the broadcast, and it's just, oh my God, I thought I was going deaf. I was swearing I was getting tetanus. What's the word? Tinnitus. Tinnitus. I'm surprised I haven't developed that. Was Alex Lanier the second best singles player in this tournament, or the player singles 2? Was he the best player in that position? Again, no, I don't think he was. For me, the best player in that position in this tournament was Pinichapon Teratsukun of Thailand. He was absolutely brilliant, didn't lose a match. He beat Alex Lanier. He beat Awi Farhan, and against Denmark, when Thailand lost 3-1, they were 2-0 down, and he silenced the Danish crowd, beating Magnus Johannesson very convincingly. And let's not forget, Magnus Johannesson was playing a great tournament. He beat Lin Chun-yi and had a long game with Li Shifeng, and the crowd being 2-0 up, the crowd were very vocal, obviously, in support of their home team. They could not get a peep in. Teratsukun was absolutely sublime. So for me, the best player at men's singles 2 was Pinichapon. And I think for Thailand, they were a little unfortunate in that quarterfinal against Denmark, because Kunlevert, I think he had a bit of a dodgy stomach, because before he played Anders, he ran off the court and went to the toilet. So had he been at top form and maybe could have beaten Anders, and then Pinichapon delivered that match could have changed differently, but it didn't happen that way. So they were knocked out in the quarters. But yeah, no, Pinichapon was absolutely was absolutely brilliant, would be my pick for best second singles player in the Thomas Cup. Why was Lin Chun-yi not picked earlier on? It's, I think, simple. Injury concerns. Right hamstring. After his All England, I think he had an injury to his right hamstring, and in the quarterfinals, both his legs were heavily taped. It was clear he couldn't play to his full potential. So I think Chinese Taipei were trying not to play him, but I think given how important the match against Denmark was, they had to win. I think they put him in because they thought he probably could still beat Magnus Johannesson. He didn't, but it also kept the Chiu Jen at third singles, and the fact that Lee Cha-hao was not playing particularly well, I think they had to play him. And then obviously in the quarterfinals, they probably felt the same thing. I think had they got to the semis, had they beaten India, that's obviously a big had they, but we might have seen the semi-finals them not played him because I don't think he could have actually handled a third match in a row. Favorite match I commentated on? To be honest, I enjoyed most of the matches I commentated on. Pretty much all of them, actually. There were a few that were a little bit one-sided that weren't quite as exciting, but the vast majority, for different reasons, I really enjoyed. England versus Malaysia. Obviously, I am English, so it was nice to see England do well. They were 2-2. It went down to the fifth match, so there was a bit of excitement there. I liked how Hai Wang showed what he can do. Cholan put in a very disciplined performance, and Sam Jones and Oliver Butler took it to Aaron Cha and So Yik. I loved their organisation in the server situation, and they also played very well against Japan, going to the only game that only match that England took Japan to 3. Canada versus Chinese Taipei in the Uber Cup was really entertaining. Again, another match that went down to the fifth and deciding match. Had Canada won it, they would have put themselves in had a great chance to get through to the knockout stages, which would have been absolutely amazing for the tournament as a whole. The Canadian players were extremely skillful, very entertaining. I even did a post where I said, do you need to have a dirty reverse slice to make the Canadian women's singles squad? Because all three that played were absolutely brilliant in doing the straight reverse here or the cross reverse. Absolutely great. I also loved Huang Yushun, the third women's singles player for Chinese Taipei. I think she has huge potential and would not be surprised if she's at women's singles 1 come 2028. Korea versus Sweden. It was a 5-0 win. It was not close, but the atmosphere inside the arena that evening, obviously with Denmark and Taipei on the court next to us and all the different possibilities that could have happened, it was just, it made the night very special and really cool. And it was good to just sit down and really closely watch the Korea men's singles. And that's where I noticed the jump smashing thing that I mentioned earlier, that I felt was something that I hadn't seen from Korea men's singles for a while. Indonesia versus France. Need I say more? I commentated with Jill Clark on that one. That was obviously, that made it special already. We were talking in between matches and before, we were like, the narrative we're going to build is France with this improbable, whilst it seemed improbable that they would have to win 4, the head-to-heads in the lineup, it seemed like on paper, anyway, that it was possible. It could go right down to the wire, but neither of us could have expected what was going on. After every match, we were looking at each other, and then especially when France were looking like they were going to win that last doubles, we really were like, oh, wow, this is something huge. This is historic for a number of reasons. So, and the badminton, the matches were really good fun. All 3 singles were great to watch, and the doubles, yes, it was nervy for Indonesia, and the French played well, but just the atmosphere, it was a special night. India versus Taipei. It was 3-0 to India, but all brilliant matches and performances. Lakshya saved 2 match points against Cho Chien Chen to win it, and he was diving everywhere. The men's doubles between Ranki Reddy and Shetty and Wang and Chu, the power all 4 men played with was absolutely frightening. The sound of it coming off, I'm not sure if it came across on the broadcast, but in my ears, which is basically the broadcast, I can hear the broadcast sound, and being there, it was like a gun going off. And I love the way that Ranki Reddy steered the ship. There was all the question marks around his shoulder injury. Some people were saying he wasn't hitting at full power. If that's not full power, some of the smashes you're hitting, and then I would never want to play him because he was hitting absolute bullets. And I think he actually helped Shetty, who I felt was a little bit of the weaker link. But once he got comfortable with the fact that Ranki Reddy was playing good badminton and was taking charge, Chirag started to settle. And the game, just the way it was approached by both pairs and how the Indians try to take it away from the Chinese Taipei and shift it to the. It was really fascinating men's doubles. And then, like I said, Ayeshetty put in a solid performance against Lin Chun-yi. Yeah, it would have been nice to see Lin Chun-yi firing on all cylinders because he's so exciting to watch. I watched him at the All England against Christo, and it was frightening, the badminton he played. He couldn't obviously bring that level out, but again, I was really, really impressed by how Ayeshetty handled that match. And then India versus France, semi-final of a Thomas Cup, semi-final of a World Championships, and I'm there commentating. Amazing. And yes, again, it was 3-0, but again, 3 really good matches. It was really nice to see that Kadambi and Pranoy are still very capable, and when they pulled off some of their old school stuff, both of them playing the spins, Kadambi, his touch on that shuttle, he can just kind of curl his racket around it and get so much more spin than most players. And then when he jumps up and hits an attack and then comes forward and reverse lands down the line, live, it is just absolutely a delight to watch. And Pranoy, he's got such a great tactical mind. So yeah, they can't quite play at the level I remember them in their prime, but they still pulled off odd moments, and that was really nice to watch. And obviously, I was very impressed by how Christo played. And it was just obviously great to be a part of a Thomas Cup semi-final. So yeah, favourite match. If I had to pick one out of those, I think Indonesia, France, just for absolutely everything that went in towards it. But I enjoyed a lot of the matches that I commentated on. My team of the week following their position in the team. So I'm assuming by that you mean that I couldn't put Shiuchi at third singles, for example. Like, they must be, I know some players played multiple roles, but basically where they were in their team, their fixed role. So this would be my team. Men's singles 1, Shiuchi. Even though he was ill early in the week, just look at how he performed in that final. And in all the knockout matches, he was just, the fact he silenced the Danish crowd exceptionally well against Anders. He gave Anders absolutely no chance. Christo was playing some of the best badminton I've seen ever from him, and Shiuchi managed to find a way to beat him. So yeah, Shiuchi has to be my number one. Next, men's doubles 1. They only played one match, and it was against Sweden, but I'm still going to pick Kim Won-ho and Sursun Jae. They are just so far above everyone else that I think if you picked anyone else, they're not going to win. And there was no other pair that I saw at men's doubles 1 that were playing the kind of badminton I think could beat Kim Won-ho and Sursun Jae. Men's singles 2, Panichapon Teratsukan, undefeated. Like I said, I think he was the best second men's singles player in the whole tournament. It's a shame that Thailand weren't able to get a little deeper. I think had they got through against Denmark and played China in the semis, I think he would have beaten Li Shifeng, playing the way that Li Shifeng was and playing the way that he was. Men's doubles 2, He Jiting and Ren Xiangyu, they won it for China, and they're just a phenomenally good pair. I think them. And then for men's singles 3, either Tomo Junior Popov or Wang Hongyang, what a match those two played. There was absolutely nothing between them. Tomo Junior Popov pulled off some more big wins throughout the tournament. Wang Hongyang obviously lost to Ayeshetty earlier in the tournament. But, the fact that Wang Hongyang pulled off the win in the final, obviously probably should give him a nod to him. But between those two, it's a flip of the coin. Hi everyone, I've just realised whilst editing this video that I didn't do the same for the Uber Cup. I do absolutely apologise for that oversight. I have created a team for the Uber Cup. I don't know why I didn't say it. So let me go through that now. Women's singles 1, An Seong. Do I really need to make any more of an explanation? Women's doubles 2, Lu Shengshu and Tan Ning. Again, you're not going to want to have anyone else than the world number ones. Women's singles 2, this is probably one of the hardest ones because I think, as I said, most players in that position had some good performances and some absolutely not so good ones. If I had to pick, I would probably put Chen Yufei. I know she didn't perform and deliver in the final, but just her consistency and her experience, that's just someone that you want in the team. Women's doubles 2, Kim Hee-jong and either Baek Ha-na or Jung Na-yeon. Obviously, Kim Hee-jong won all her matches with Jung Na-yeon, but then played the final with Baek Ha-na and won the match and the tournament for Korea. So I think that's a pretty solid women's doubles 2 pair. And for women's singles 3, I've got 2 picks. One is Esther Widoyo of Indonesia. She was fabulous when she played in there. She won some big matches. And I've also gone for Zhu Wenjing. She only played in the group stages for China, but when she played Denmark, she absolutely took apart Lina Kirchfeldt. I know that Lina Kirchfeldt found it hard to be as motivated because they'd already lost the tie and there were bigger matches later in the tournament. But Zhu Wenjing, for me, is a real talent for the future. And I know she wasn't picked, but I would pick her. And I think just the way that I saw when she played out of the Chinese women's singles, she looked the most settled, which was actually quite interesting. So anyway, that's my Uber Cup pick, just like with my Thomas Cup one and my Uber Cup one and everything else. Let me know your thoughts. Are there any other examples in the history that two of the best men's singles are also the number one men's doubles? The only example, I can't really think of one where two men's singles players are also the best. I know that Park Ju-bong in the 1980s, and there's probably a few others like James Wee King, played both events, but Park Ju-bong in the 1980s played first men's singles and first men's doubles for Korea. In the 1986 Asian Games, Park Ju-bong won the mixed and the men's doubles individual and the team event. And in the team event final, he played first doubles and first men's singles, beating the guy that won the men's singles individual, Zhao Yanhua of China. So obviously Park Ju-bong probably would be a good example. I can find an example in the Uber Cup, and that is in the 2000s, the Netherlands did very well, especially in 2006 where they reached the final. And I looked at this, but in 2004, 6 and 8, definitely 6 and 8, they played all three singles first. Because in 2006, let's use their best one. They beat Taipei in the semi-finals 3-0, winning all three singles. And then in the final, they actually lost all three singles against China, because China were also ridiculous in absolutely every department. But in 2006, you had Mia Ordina, Judith Mellendijks, and Karina de Wit. And what's interesting about the 2006 team is that everyone's been saying France had a squad of 10 and they played 5 players of that, 3 singles players and then the additional 2 doubles. Netherlands played 4 because Mia Ordina, all 3 of their singles players all played doubles. Mia Ordina and Judith Mellendijks played doubles together, and then Karina de Wit played with, I can't remember their name, but played the second women's doubles. So they played with 1 less. And in 2008, where I actually was, I remember sitting behind the court. They almost beat China in the quarterfinals. They lost, or was it in the group stages? I can't remember, but it was 3 singles first, and they won the first singles. They lost the second singles 22-20 in the third, and then won the third women's singles. And then in women's doubles, I think obviously 1 or 2. It wasn't quite all 3 singles players playing doubles, but at least 2 of them, I think, they lost those doubles insanely easily. So the fact that 1 women's singles second finished 22-20, and I remember it being very tight, and I'm pretty sure match points, I think it was Judith Mellendijks who lost that, they could have actually put China out through the same tactic or the same approach that France have had. So whilst I can't think of any in the men's game, in the women's game, it certainly has happened. And this leads obviously nicely on to the final question, and that's the French situation. Should doubles, again, I got loads of questions on this. This is me just kind of creating a question, a talking point. So the French team should, and the big question is, should doubles be a must in the Thomas Cup and Uber Cup? So say in the knockout stages, should we have a rule where, because obviously it's made up of singles and doubles, should there be a rule, because this isn't currently in there, where there should be at least in the first 3 matches, at least 1 doubles being played? Now, I'm going to answer that question, but I think it's important to kind of explain what's happened first, because some people might not be aware of this whole situation. So France, in their order in every match, I think, possibly even against Algeria, because Algeria were forced to use this order, they did the first, they went men's singles 1, 2, and 3, then men's doubles 2, then men's doubles 1. So why? Obviously, there are rules. I probably put a link to the rules for the Thomas Uber Cup below, so people can go look for themselves. But in short, if there are players that are doubling up, then there's 2 rules. 1, they must play their singles match before their doubles match. And 2, there must be at least a 1 match gap. So because Christo and Thomas are playing doubles together, they have to play their singles. So men's singles 1 and 3 must come before men's doubles 1. But then because I think, and there's another one where the singles must be played in order as well. I don't think you can go 1, 3, 2. I think it must also be 1, 2, 3. Because Tom is playing 3, men's doubles 1 must then come at the end. There are 8 predetermined orders, and the only one out of those 8 that fits for the French team is the one that was used. So men's singles 1, men's singles 2, men's singles 3, men's doubles 2, men's doubles 1. So I think some additional context also needs to be used, because there's been a lot of comments online about this is not a singles cup, this is a Thomas Cup, the essence of the event must have doubles, or the spirit of the tournament, which I get and I don't get. It's a tournament, you know, you're there to win. But anyway, let me give you some additional context, because Thomas Cup has always favoured singles. There's 3 singles matches and 2 doubles. So you can win without winning a single doubles match throughout the whole tournament. You could not win a single doubles match and still win. I know Denmark weren't in that situation, but in 2016, the final, they lost both doubles. They won all 3 singles. Thailand in the Uber Cup in 2018, when they knocked out China, lost both doubles, won all 3 singles. So it's possible. Singles is the mainstay. Not only this, but it wasn't until the late 80s where the format was singles first, then doubles. Even when it was best of 9, we had 5 matches on day 1, 4 on the next. It was 3 singles, 2 doubles. Then I think 2 singles, 2 doubles. So singles always came first. It was always the deciding factor. In fact, actually, it was, I'm not sure if it was him alone, but Punch Gunalan, who was a Malaysian player and became the coach, was actually the coach when Malaysia won in 1992, pushed for that to change so that it would go singles, doubles, singles, doubles, singles, doubles, because he felt that Malaysia would have a better chance of disrupting momentum and rhythm of a team if they could, because they were they had strong throughout, but in singles, China and Indonesia were stronger than them. So the fact that China and Indonesia could just win all 3 singles first and the doubles were dead matches, he felt that by having it alternating, it could give obviously Malaysia a chance to stay in the tie, but also break momentum, which I know is obviously a big conversation around what France have done here. The last bit of context, I've already kind of mentioned it. France aren't the only team to have ever done this and been successful. I already mentioned the Netherlands in the early 2000s in the Uber Cup. And also France used this order when they last played the Thomas Cup in 2022. And they also used it earlier this year at the European Men's Team Championships when they beat Denmark for the first time. So it's not like suddenly this order has come out of nowhere. It isn't new. Now, big question, should this be looked at? Should there be discussions around the fact that there should be at least 1 doubles in the first 3 matches? Now, for me, that's a great conversation to have. And I'd possibly agree that yes, there probably should be. Because while singles is the forefront, it kind of always has been in both events, Thomas and Uber Cup, doubles is an integral part. I've stated numerous times online that I think this is a great conversation to have. The logistics, there could be a whole host of orders if this rule was to change. That, you know, it would require the rule of singles before doubles to be removed for it to be possible. I think it's a great conversation to have. I've never ever said otherwise, and on numerous comment threads and on posts I've done on Instagram since this has all been talked about, I'm on board with the conversation. However, what I haven't liked is the way that people have framed it, or the vast majority, not everyone, but a lot of people have framed it. You know, I've had people say France are cheating, they're using a loophole, even the BDRF are helping France. And for me, it's not right, and it's just wrong, because it undermines what the French have achieved. I've said this a few times through the video. They came back from losing to Thailand, in which they used the same order, and it wasn't an issue. There was no talk about France's order when they did it against Thailand. There really wasn't much when they actually did it against Indonesia, because they won the 4th doubles, the 4th match, the doubles, which again goes to the fact that they earned their spot in the quarters. It only really came about, obviously, in the knockout stages when you don't play the last matches and suddenly we're not seeing any doubles and France had this momentum. etc., etc. Other things that I think it undermines is, like I said, Alex Lanier was really struggling, and it undermines the fact the French team really got behind him and lifted him, and he delivered some big wins for the team. It undermines the fact that Tomo Junior Popov got his first ever win over Koki Watanabe in the quarterfinals. Um, you know, I said against Indonesia they had to win 4. Indonesia only needed to win 2 matches, and France 4. France had to win double the amount. And the fact that Indonesia had the huge advantage historically and everywhere in the doubles events. So I don't like when people are saying that they cheated or this. It undermines all the things, all the amazing things that France did throughout the week, and how well, for most of it, that their players played. It must also be said the teams they beat also had very solid singles lineups. Indonesia, very tight. Christie and Christo, was that like 5 and 4 in the world? Christie has got more achievements under his belt, more experienced, has won a Thomas Cup before, delivered the winning point. Awi Farhan and Alex Lanier, they're the same age. They've had lots of battles before. They're at a similar wavelength. Ginting and Thomas Jr. head-to-head was even. And again, Ginting has more experience in that respect. And then, of course, the doubles. Against Japan, it's the same. I think very, very tight. I've seen many battles between Tanaka and Alex Lanier. We know what Kodai's been a world finalist, and then Koki had never lost to Thomas Jr. And then against India, it's a shame they didn't have Lakshya Sen, who was fit, because that could have made a really crazy match. And I think maybe in hindsight, India possibly could have still put Lakshya in to strengthen the next singles and maybe got it to the doubles. But again, also versus India, I said this huge advantage in the first men's doubles, but second men's doubles, I'd like to have seen that match. I'm not so certain India would have then taken it to. I think India needed to be 2-1 up by the time they go into the doubles to be certain of qualification for the final. Like I said, the lineup that France used, perfectly legal. France have done this before. They even lost using this lineup versus Thailand. They won the doubles versus Indonesia. And lastly, the Popovs are a legit pair. They are France's strongest pair. Based on the rules, France put in their strongest team. And based on the rules, that's the only order of play that could be played. And let's not forget, the rules surrounding the Thomas and Uber Cup, the lineup rules, have been in place longer than France have been playing in the Thomas Cup, because they first qualified for the finals in 2014, and these rules around lineups have been around far longer. Now, of course, it did give them a huge advantage in terms of momentum. They got their 3 strongest matches out first, so they could blitz teams and win 3-0, and they did do that. Obviously, and we know how momentum is a huge advantage, and it's huge in team events. And France used that to their full capacity. But the flip side is also true. It does come with its risks and applies pressure to the players, because they lose just 1 out of those 3, and it's pretty much game over. That's what happened against Thailand. So in some respects, whilst momentum is with the French, and if you're the winning side, it's slightly larger. But for me, the pressure, and obviously that adds pressure onto the opposing team, knowing we're strong in the doubles, but we need to get there first. But doesn't that not make it equal pressure that the French know if they lose just 1, it's going to the doubles where they have the disadvantage? It's that's an interesting way to look at it. And also, I'd add to this that the Popovs doubling up over and over again, whilst they didn't have to play, so I guess lucky, if they did, that's not an advantage long term, because that is tough to play this level almost back to back. If you think about individual tournaments, when the Popovs play, usually if they play their singles matches first, morning, and then afternoon to evening, much bigger break. Whereas here, it'd literally be, they'd come off, or Tomo would, he'd have 1 match break in doubles, which, as we know, could only be half an hour, 40 minutes if it's a quick one, and then they're back on court. So could potentially be less than an hour's break. And imagine against China, he just played for like 80 odd minutes, or even against he did against Indonesia, he had to come out, but against China, had it gone to the 5th match and he had to come out, and even Christo had a hard match to come out that close and play doubles. Yeah, so it's whilst it gave me the advantage, there's risks to it all. So yeah, no, I completely agree with people who feel there should be a conversation around this. Maybe more orders of play or a rule change to suggest that doubles must be included in the first of the 3 matches. It's a similar conversation to probably what Punch Glenelyn was having in the late 80s, where he felt that doubles should be there should be a break in the singles to not allow these strong singles teams to just win matches that way. So yeah, like I said, I'll just repeat myself very quickly. I like that conversation and framing it that way, but I don't like people that are just like belittling or undermining the French's achievement, because let's be honest, when people chose France as their potential medalists, this was exactly why I chose them as dark horse. It was because they thought they would win through the singles. Let me ask a question. If the order was classic and they'd still won 3-2 by just winning only singles matches, not winning any singles doubles, would people think differently? Or would you still be going, well, they just got 3 singles? Yeah. So anyway, those are my thoughts. It's definitely not illegal. It's been perfectly legal. France didn't just create the Popov pair to be able to expose that order either. They are genuinely their top pair. And let's not forget, they won the Europeans in the same hall. They played both pairs that played in the final. This was their strongest lineup possible. And through the rules, this was the only way that it could be played. So if you're going to put any criticism as to if you're against the way that France won, it should not go anything towards France. And I don't think you should criticize the BWF because these rules have been in place for a long time, but maybe you could say, maybe the rules need to be relooked at, or maybe the format, so we can see doubles, we can see more, we can see both disciplines. But anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Should the BWF have discussions over the rules for order of play for Thomas Cup? Personally, I don't actually mind how it is, as whilst it can provide an advantage, it also has huge risks associated with it. And also for me, it doesn't matter whether I see 3 singles in a row or even if I saw 2 doubles and a singles. If those matches are exciting and tight and great, for me personally as a viewer and as a commentator, that's what I want to see. I want to see the best matches. The last thing is maybe the Thomas Cup and Uber Cup by extension add a third doubles. Make doubles and singles perfectly equal, so you can't win on just one event. And then if it's even, I don't know how, maybe a golden set or whatever, then the conversation becomes even more tricky. But then could that be unfair? I personally think if we did that, whilst it sounds good on paper, what's been quite good for the Thomas Cup, and I was having these conversations with Steen Pedersen and a few others, is that back in the day when Steen was a coach, there were probably 4 or 5 nations, Denmark, Malaysia, China, Korea, and Indonesia, really, that would win. So 5. Now, in the Thomas Cup, it's almost doubled. Way more teams, like India are one of them, Japan, France, obviously, Thailand. We're looking at 9-10 teams, so it's doubled. If we add another doubles, we could see it come down to a very short list. Anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts on all of that, as well as everything else I've spoken of. I've spoken for a long time here. I've now got to try and put this video together. Yeah, so I had an absolutely brilliant time commentating. The last thing I'll say is, if you watched any of the matches I commentated on, please do let me know what you thought of my commentary. I know it probably wasn't flawless, but I did my best. I had a great time, and it seems likely that I'll be called again, so we'll have to see on that. Probably not till next year, but I'd love another opportunity. But anyway, thanks for watching. I've been talking for far too long. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like it, share it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. All the usual YouTube stuff. I will see you in the next one. Obviously, it's going to come. I've got a project in the workings that maybe I can get out before Singapore and Indonesia. But if not, I'll see you for the breakdowns on Singapore Open and the Indonesia Open. See you later, everyone.